From the point of view of motivation, our military is ready.
We need to gather more capacity, and it is us who have to provide for it.
At brigade levels, we're ready.
Certainly, they need more preparation, they need more arms.
Today I can confirm that the UK is donating Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine.
From the point of view of equipment, not everything has arrived yet. That's your answer.
We've seen what Ukrainians can do when they have the right capability.
Welcome to the show. It's good to have you with us. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Kyiv needs more time and more weapons for its long-anticipated counteroffensive against Russia. He believes Ukraine could make progress if they launched it now, but the human cost would be far too great. Fighting has been deadlocked in the eastern town of Bakhmut. Over the past months, it has seen the bloodiest battle of the war. Verifying information coming out of the largely destroyed city is difficult, and there are once again conflicting reports over the situation in and around Bakhmut. Kyiv claims it's pushed Russian forces back over recent days, an account that's backed by the Wagner mercenary group. Moscow does admit the situation on the ground is difficult, but assures attempts to capture the former mining town remain in place.
The Ukrainian military has released more footage showing what it says are its troops in action near Bakhmut. Soldiers dismount an armoured car and storm what appears to be a Russian defensive position. Ukraine claims it has advanced up to 2 kilometers in the area. The head of Russia's mercenary Wagner group, which has played a prominent role in the battle for Bakhmut, says a full-scale Ukrainian counteroffensive is underway. The offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces has begun. The units that were trained and received the necessary weapons, equipment, tanks and everything else are already fully engaged. But Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says that's not the case. Ukraine still needs more time and weapons. From the point of view of motivation, our military is ready. As far as staffing brigades goes, we're ready. From a point of view of equipment, not everything has arrived yet. That's your answer. And Ukraine continues to suffer a barrage of Russian missile and drone strikes. This is the aftermath of a strike in Sloviansk in eastern Ukraine. One woman was killed here, adding to a rapidly growing number of civilian casualties of Russian aggression. Britain now says attacks like this have led it to supply Ukraine with cruise missiles.
Ukraine has a right to be able to defend itself against this. The use of Storm Shadow will allow Ukraine to push back Russian forces based within Ukrainian sovereign territory.
The Storm Shadow missile has a much longer range than other weapons provided by the West, giving the Ukraine the capability to strike deep into Russian-held territory, including Crimea.
My next guest is Mark Canty. He's a retired colonel with the U.S. Marine Corps who served several tours in Vietnam and Iraq. He's now a senior advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies think tank in Washington. Mr. Canty, welcome to the day. Let's start with the Storm Shadow missile. How much of a difference will those make on the battlefield? How can the Ukrainians use them?
Well, these are significant because they have such long range. It will allow the Ukrainians to strike targets deep, particularly in Crimea, which has been outside of most of Ukraine's capabilities. They'll be able to attack the Russian fleet that is stationed there. They'll probably be able to isolate the peninsula by taking out the Kerch Bridge. We do have to keep in mind that the number of missiles is probably going to be limited. The Brits don't have that many. This is not going to radically change the battlefield, but it will be very helpful for the Ukrainians.
Will they be able to use these missiles immediately?
There's no reason that they couldn't. They do need to be wired for the Ukrainian aircraft. I think they've been working on that for a while. We'll see how quickly they can launch them, but there's no reason they couldn't.
Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about Bakhmut because it's a situation we've been following for months now. Russia has been trying to take the city for, I think it's half a year. Now Ukraine seems to be making small but significant gains. What are we seeing here, in your opinion?
Well, this looks very significant in the sense that the Ukrainians are gaining territory for really 6 months. They've been on the defensive. They've been losing territory bit by bit as the Russians have attacked, particularly in the last 2 or 3 months where their offensive took place. The fact that they can make any progress, that they can go over to the attack, even on a limited scale, is significant.
Do you think we're seeing this as part of a bigger turnaround in the war?
I think the short answer is not at this point. The gains have been small. They're significant in that they're making gains at all. But this doesn't look like the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Zelenskyy was saying that it's not. And this is the wrong place for Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive. It's a built-up area. The Russians are pretty strong here. The Ukrainians want to attack someplace where they can use all of these new armored vehicles that they've been receiving. They need open terrain, not something closed like Bakhmut.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about this anticipated counteroffensive in a second, but I want to stay in Bakhmut for a little while. We've been getting mixed messaging there, not only from the opposing sides, but also from the Wagner mercenary group and from the Russian Defense Ministry. What's behind this mixed messaging? What can we read into this?
Well, we've been getting mixed messaging like this for a long time. The Russian government and the Wagner group have been quite independent, and the head of the Wagner group, Prigozhin, has been quite outspoken in his views. So I think we're seeing more of that discrepancy. I think Wagner wants to bring attention to themselves, arguing that they are an important component of the Russian military capability. Even though they say that this is the beginning of a counteroffensive, I think that's trying to increase their significance. A counteroffensive would be, I think, much broader.
Mm-hmm. Analysts are saying that Bakhmut is seeing the bloodiest ground combat in Europe since World War II. Is this months-long effort and sacrifice understandable from a strategic viewpoint? Because you just said that focusing a counteroffensive on that region would make no real sense. So do you understand that Kyiv is throwing so much at Bakhmut?
Well, we don't know that they're throwing a lot right now for a counteroffensive. They have been on the defensive and have been feeding forces in there to hold the city. First, they were holding the city to prevent getting encircled, and then the city became symbolic of Ukrainian resistance. The way that a city like Stalingrad or Verdun in the past have achieved significance. The fact that they've been able to hold it is significant, but right now the city is so wrecked it doesn't have much strategic significance, has a lot of psychological significance.
Yeah. So if I'm reading you correctly, from what you've said before, you don't think that the counteroffensive has begun yet. What do you think it is going to look like once it actually kicks off?
Well, the Ukrainians have built 8 or 9 brigades with the new equipment that U.S. and NATO have provided. These are heavily armored. They're pretty well trained. So I think you're going to see an attack that's going to be much broader than what we're seeing in Bakmut. And I think it's going to be in open terrain so that they can use these capabilities. Tanks are not very good in closed areas. If the Ukrainians can break through the Russian lines and get these armored forces into open terrain, they could make very significant advances.
And what parts of the country do you think this will be focusing on then?
Well, the consensus or the thinking is that this will be in the Zaporizhia area. There's a long stretch of front line there. There hasn't been much fighting there recently, and there's an opportunity to perhaps break through the Russian front lines, maybe even get to the coast and divide the Russians into two sectors.
Mm-hmm. And I want to bring up something entirely different, something we learned of today. The U.S. ambassador to South Africa has accused the country of providing weapons to Russia. The government says it's looking into the matter. Now, these are very serious claims for a country insisting on being neutral. What do you make of this?
Well, it is worth looking into because the United States and the West want to make these sanctions as tight as possible. But we also know that there are countries who are, for reasons of politics or just economic advantage, taking advantage of the Russians, the low costs of, oil, for example, that the Russians are providing. So on the one hand, it's not surprising that some neutrals are trying to take advantage. On the other hand, it's important to close these loopholes.
Mark Cansian of the CSIS, many thanks.
Thanks for having me on the show.